I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
September 11, 2001, I was a sophomore in high school in Houston, Texas.
I was in Rio Rancho. I wasn't in the fire service yet. I was working for a retailer. So I was at work that morning when everything started getting on the news.
I was at work at the hospital pharmacy.
I was actually in between a Tasker Arena and the high school tennis courts.
On 9/11/2001, I was working at a body shop in Leeds, Alabama.
When I got home, they had it on the news. The first tower had been hit, and just thought it was a freak accident until we were standing there watching it live when the second tower got hit, and that's when you knew something was seriously wrong.
I was starting a new job that morning. I was sitting on my couch, getting on my shoes, when I saw that second plane hit.
I was a state trooper in Arizona. I was actually working just outside of Kingman, Arizona. And the first report that was given to me was that a plane had hit the World Trade Center.
9/11/2001, I was in 8th grade in O'Donnell, Texas, where I grew up. I was in Algebra 1 class.
At the time, I was at school. I guess I was 6 years old. I was pretty young.
I was on my first month as fire chief for the city of Hobbs, and my wife and I were getting ready to go to work.
I figured we would be deploying troops over there, and I figured we'd be going to war. So those are my thoughts, and that's what I was doing on 9/11.
What were your initial thoughts and feelings to it?
I'd say the first feeling that came through my head was just shock and disbelief.
The immediate thoughts were, it's going to be busy for those guys over there, and not in a good way.
Immediately, I just thought, this is crazy. How could this happen? What's going to happen next?
Once I learned what was going on, it really hit me hard.
The first thoughts are like, oh my God, what's going on here? What is going on in our country?
At that point in time in my life, we didn't really understand or know what a terrorist attack was, or that someone had it out for America this way.
I mean, at 9 years old, like I didn't even really know what the heck was going on. It was crazy to see, a couple of skyscrapers in New York just on fire.
Nobody really had answers. Nobody had the answers we wanted. Why did this happen? Who did this? What's next?
How do you prepare? How do you train for something that's so unimaginable?
You never know really when something like that could happen. You've always just got to be ready for it, hoping that it never will happen again.
To this day, I think the greatest day was 9/12. Just the fact that America could come together and realize the big picture and become united. I thought it was pretty amazing.
Throughout the next few weeks, I remember everybody just pulling together under that veil of patriotism. And all of a sudden, we were all Americans. It was the first time that we were called by American. Because prior to that, we were always separated as groups of Americans, but we were never really together.
What are your thoughts and feelings in regards to honoring 9/11 every year?
I think it's important every year that we take time to remember that there was 3,000 plus people, Americans, that died unnecessarily. It was for no reason, besides hate.
Every year, we need to not forget. Definitely a day to honor them, and I wish we could do more.
We definitely need to remember because just like working now with the fire department, you don't think about it every time your coworkers go out on a call. But for all of those, it was just a regular call that day.
I think it's very important. Now more than ever, we need this reminder for people to come back together.
It's humbling because being at a position with all those guys made so many selfless decisions, and still to this day probably would make them again.
We can't forget that happened, and we need to make for sure that that these guys who lost their life are honored.
You know, remembering the ones that died that day and the families that, lost family members, all the first responders that were lost that day, and the ones that we continue to lose. It's important to remember them.
The vow was made that day and the days following that we would never forget, and I wish people would continue that and never forget what took place on that day, and never forget those people that suffered that day, lost their lives, and that continue to suffer to this day.
I think it's important to honor it every year, especially now more than ever. It feels like the country's starting to forget. There's a lot of anti-American sentiment in our own country, it seems like. And I think it's more important now than ever to remember, what we are, who we are as a country.
If we get to a point where we don't remember that day and remember those people and remember the sacrifices that occurred, we are dooming ourselves to a position of allowing things to happen again.
We can't forget. As soon as we forget, that's the most opportune time for something like that to happen again.
I fear that most people forget or have lost the value of what has happened. And I think that people have trained themselves to minimize the effects of 9/11.
Whether you know anybody that lost their lives in the planes, in the Pentagon, even the civilians and the first responders that lost their lives, you feel it because those were our people. We lost a lot of people. Whether you know them or not, you're attached to them.
I believe it's just a reminder to let us know that never let our guard down, never forget, never try to take anything for granted.
That's a huge responsibility on all of us that were alive during that time, is to make sure that these younger generations who weren't even born yet understand the impact that had on our country, and it's our responsibility to make sure they know.
Many of our responders today that make the Hobbs Fire Department and many fire service were either infants, toddlers, or weren't even born, and they're serving the country. It is those that have experienced it, that vividly remember what they were doing on 9/11. It is our duty to ensure that they understand and never forget.